And in a sense, so the Grixis deck, we called it with Grixis control, not a Delver strategy, but yet it still has Young Pyromancer. It's somewhat in this mid-range control area of the metagame.
Right, 4 copies of Cabal Therapy was a pretty common sideboard card in the previous iterations of Blue-Red Delver. Hugo moving into the main deck.
All right, well, underway, Jacob on the play. He'll have a turn 1 Delver of Secrets. For Hugo, it's going to be a Ponder. Nothing to the board just yet as he wants to set up his draw. He'll go ahead and shuffle off the Ponder.
So Jacob's list here, usually these Delver decks, they play 18 lands, which means there's 2 flex slots available. Then there's the question of Stifle or no, Gitaxian Probe or no. Jacob Wilson on 0 copies of Gitaxian Probe, 4 main deck Stifles. His flex slot this weekend, 2 copies of Dismember, probably anticipating a lot of copies of Tarmogoyf and Tassiger.
Certainly in this matchup, there will be a copy of Tassiger on Hugo's side. So we go back over to Jacob on the second turn, does not flip his Delvers, draws a Tropical Island here. He'll swing in, putting Hugo to 19, but looks to have some follow-up threats. It's going to be turn 2, Tarmogoyf.
Leftovers, Dismember, Force of Will blue card. Pretty good start here for Jacob.
Yeah, and Temur Delver, this has been one of those standby decks. It had been 2 years ago, this deck was just crushing Legacy and has never moved too far off the top. I think that took a hit during the Treasure Cruise era.
For sure. You know, Nimble Mongoose and Tarmogoyf took some splash damage during that era. And the blue-red bill was just so efficient and so ruthless that Temur Delver got pushed out for a little while, but should be back in a big way, just like Sultai Delver. Was on vacation for a little bit, but it's going to be a Legacy staple.
Force of Will pitching Snapcaster Mage for Hugo. He's going to go for a counter spell on Tarmogoyf. Jacob deciding whether he wants to force back, and he will. He'll pitch a Ponder of his own. And so Tarmogoyf will resolve. And Hugo, no other land as he goes ahead and passes back. Jacob flipping the Delver on upkeep.
And Hugo with a pretty clunky hand as well here with Counterspell and Baleful Strix. Can't cast him right now.
Really shows why Hugo first shuffled off the Ponder and then wanted to fight so hard over Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, he's definitely got some powerful tools in his hand if he can get to his second land.
For Jacob, though, land 3 and a Ponder, he's going to hope to just bury this game. Ponders, then Brainstorm, still with a fetch land up. That fetch land, if he cracks it here, will grow his Tarmogoyf, so I'm wanting to sequence it that way. Now Tarmogoyf up to a 3/4.
And Jacob was able to pick up a Daze off of that Brainstorm, which might be too much for Hugo to overcome.
Yeah, Daze, almost a hard counter on this board. And here's a swing, that's for 6. Hugo draws its Polluted Delta. He will have his land, but under a very serious clock.
And Temur Delver plays probably the most efficient game of Legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. It is so good at playing multiple spells in one turn and just operating on a very small amount of resources. See a fetch here for Hugo. He will go for some spell, but you have to think Jacob is going to be ready to daze it almost regardless of what card it is.
And this is definitely worth dazing because this is an opportunity for Hugo to make another land drop. It puts an artifact in the graveyard now along with a creature.
Yeah, because Tarmogoyf all up to a 5/6. Jacob will daze. That'll swing in for 8, putting Hugo down to 3. Jacob just passing back the turn with a land, counterspell, lightning bolt, maybe a Tassiger. Hugo has a shot. It's really Tarmogoyf now, though, bigger than Tassiger.
And no hesitation here from Jacob.
Yeah, lightning bolt on Delver. On the aberration, and Jacob will cast Force of Will, pitching Force of Will.
2 lethal creatures, and Jacob hoping to close the game out and does.
Yeah, so as easy as that, Jacob Wilson takes the first game off Hugo Rodrigues.
That is the most classic Temur Delver game there of Jacob winning with no cards left in his hand, being an opponent with multiple spells left over. Just got out efficiency there in large part because Hugo missed his second land drop.
All right, so looking through the sideboard here, Hugo not able, is going to want to lower his curve, I think, as much as possible.
Especially with a deck as vulnerable to Wasteland as his, it's really important for him to push it down as low as possible. He's got 2 copies of Pyroblast, a Notion Thief, 2 Pithy Needles, a Flusterstorm, a Smithereens, 2 copies of Nile Spellbomb, 2 Surgical Expression, 2 Blood Moon, 1 Sun Demise, 1 Fork Bolt. So I think Nile Spellbomb is excellent in this matchup. Jacob's green threats are all predicated on the graveyard. The cheap counter spells like Pyroblast and Flusterstorm, they're good, not great here. They don't always line up the right way, but still worth bringing in. I think the 2 copies of Blood Moon on the play are pretty good for Hugo. On the draw, they can definitely be too slow. You see Jacob's able to develop a board very quickly. But on the play, Hugo can push that card through and lock Jacob out of the game because Jacob's list plays with no basic lands.
Yeah. Also Forked Bolt. Any sort of cheap removal is possibly playable here. Forked Bolt really only hits Delver of Secrets before it flips.
It may be as a one of something Hugo needs to bring in just to lower his curve a little bit. It's got, it's sort of in the same space as Flusterstorm and Pyroblast. It's very good a small percentage of the time, but that still might be worth bringing in just because it's cheap.
Yeah, over on Jacob's side,
Two copies of Pyroblast, a Blue Elemental Blast, a Light from the Loam, a Flusterstorm, 2 copies of Spell Snare, an Ancient Grudge, 2 Grafdigger's Cage, 2 copies of Rough Tumble, a Sulfur Elemental, and 2 copies of Submerge. Part of the problem here is Jacob doesn't quite know exactly what he's playing against. He saw Baleful Strix, he saw Lightning Bolt, and some counterspells, so that's not terribly informative. It wouldn't surprise me if he went for the Loam plan, just because Hugo's deck looked like something that could get buried by Loam with Wasteland. Now, Hugo's deck actually has basic lands and a Blood Moon package, so it may not be very good here. The 2 copies of Pyroblast, I think, are very likely to be brought in. The copy of Flusterstorm is good in counterspell battles, but probably going to be some light sideboarding here from Jacob.
How do you feel about a card like Spell Snare out of Jacob Wilson? Hugo is playing a Baleful Strix deck, or at least Jacob believes that he is.
It could be fine here. Part of the problem with bringing in a card like that is Jacob just doesn't have a lot of information to work with right now. He saw very few cards out of Hugo's deck, so he did see a target for Spell Snare, but that by itself is not enough to warrant bringing in. Now, if Jacob knows what Hugo's playing and knows that this is Baleful Strix and Young Pyromancer, Spell Snare becomes very attractive. But right now, Jacob may not be working with enough information to make that sort of determination.
All right, well, we'll see what they do for game 2. Both players at 9 and 3, as you mentioned before. They are looking to win out here to make it into the top 8 of our first Invitational of the season. But it's not our only Invitational of the season. If you're wondering how you can get to the Invitational and compete on this stage, we have our quarter 2 schedule as we build up to our next Invitational at the Columbus Game Fair. So this is going to be our next slate of tournaments. We start in Syracuse next week. That's going to be you and Cedric covering it with a standard open there. The next month, we'll have some standard opens. You'll get a chance to play new standard with Dragons of Tarkir. We move to Providence. We move to Cleveland. And then it's off to the West Coast, if you want to play there, for a standard open in Seattle at the beginning of May.
And I imagine our colleague in the booth, Cedric Phillips, will be battling in that one, as you and I will be covering that.
All right, it's a short season, though, as we make it to the end of June. In May, we have a standard open back in Dallas that we'll be covering, and a legacy open in Worcester until we finally conclude this with our first ever modern invitational, which will be modern and standard in Columbus.
With a modern open series event. So if you don't qualify for the Invitational or you can't make it, there's still a 2-day 20K modern open series event June 5th through 7th tied to the Origins Game Fair in Columbus, Ohio.
Back to our match. Hugo Rodrigues down a game. Said before, Jacob Wilson it's just now that he's starting to get up toward the top of the standings, picked up 2 losses early in standard on day 1. But since then has been very dominant. 4-0'd the legacy portion yesterday, 3-1 standard this morning.
I imagine he has to feel very comfortable here. He's been playing this deck for several years now. I'm sure he's comfortable with the flex slots. If he's playing with Dismember, it's because he's anticipating a lot of Tarmogoyfs, a lot of Tassakers, which from what we've seen this weekend has been an excellent choice. There's been a lot of those cards floating around.
Jacob has an open series win out on the West Coast with this very same deck, and really has hardly changed a card over the last couple of years.
Well, a lot of this list is set in stone. The 12 creatures, they're not going anywhere. I would say Lightning Bolt, Force of Will, Daze, Spell Pierce, maybe is a hard lot to be in the deck. The cantrips, certainly Brainstorm and Ponder, aren't going anywhere. Not a lot of flex slots. Now, the sideboard, things really open up a lot. There's a lot of different options to go to, and depending on the metagame you're expecting, you can see more Ancient Grudges, more Crow's Hand Grips, more Submerges. There's a lot of cards to play with, but the main deck, pretty much set in stone. No copies of Gataxian Probe is a heartbreaker for yours truly, but I defer to Jacob's expertise.
Yeah, 4 copies of Stifle and Spell Pierce. Doesn't leave too much room for the set of Gataxian Probes.
Well, Jacob's, the way that he's constructed his deck is just trying to leverage a mana advantage. He's playing as much as possible for 1 mana. He has Stifle along with Wasteland to try to choke people's mana. Spell Pierce and Daze are very powerful in that sort of game plan. It's clear what he's trying to do.
All right, well, Hugo has kept a hand. We'll start, and here with a Jetaxian Probe, and we will get to see the cards that Jacob has kept. Looks like it is 3 fetch lands, along with Brainstorm, Force of Will, and then a creature curve of Nimble Mongoose and Tarmogoyf.
Very land-heavy hand by Team Redelver standards, but Brainstorm can clean that up.
Yeah, when you have hands with a Brainstorm and a fetch land, you can really increases the range of things you can keep.
And Hugo has brought in the Blood Moons. I assume that he would on the play. If we go to game 3, I'm curious to see if he'll have them for the draw.
Starts out on Polluted Delta. So we're back over to Jacob. He has a Delta of his own. Will likely go for that Nimble Mongoose. Once Hugo is able to, if he's able to stick the Blood Moon, then he'll just have to clean up the green creatures afterward.
Jacob gets to play his red spells, obviously. So he gets to cast lightning bolts if they're still in his deck, but by and large, he is locked out.
So the Nimble Mongoose for Wilson. Back to Rodrigues. Does have a copy of Baleful Strix in hand. See if he wants to risk it to a daze. He looks like he does. He'll go ahead and sacrifice both fetch lands down to 16.
And I think that Hugo would like to try to play a card good enough this turn to bait out the Force of Will if his plan is to go to Blood Moon.
See Pyroblast, Blood Moon, another land in Rodrigues' hand. He'll go for Baleful Strix.
It's a really good turn 2 play here because if it resolves, great, and if it doesn't resolve, also great.
Now, Baleful Strix does a great job of trading with both Nimble Mongoose and Tarmogoyf, cards that can be difficult for Hugo to deal with. You see Jacob pitching Force of Will to Force of Will to counter the Strix.
So Jacob, I believe, picked up a Tarmogoyf on the previous turn, which means that, yes, Hugo will be able to stick Blood Moon next turn most likely, but then he has a lot of cleanup to do.
Well, also, if you look at Hugo's lands, he has a basic island and an underground sea. So if he Blood Moons next turn, he will be cutting himself off of black mana.
Yes. And there is no swamp in Hugo's list.
So he's prepared to not play black spells.
I was going to say that was a very curious fetch otherwise, but it appears that he just simply does not play with a swamp.
For Jacob, he's going to make the Tarmogoyf here. And pass back to Hugo. Because Jacob pitched Force of Will to Force of Will, Hugo maybe can assume here that the way is clear for Blood Moon.
I think he's got to go for it this turn because it's certainly not getting better after this.
And even then, he'll have some cleanup to do. Scalding Tarn fetches Hugo down to 14. Tarmogoyf already at a 5-6. Baleful Strix has just been helping out Tarmogoyf both games.
Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate for Hugo because it's very good against this deck if it resolves. But it has not.
Yeah.
Instead, has been a liability.
See how sometimes these cards with some incidental but unusual creature types really helping out Tarmogoyf. Here's Volcanic Island from Rodrigues. Once he gets down the Blood Moon, how does Hugo get all these green guys off the board?
It's very hard for his list. I mean, he can try to get to Young Pyromancer and just create a sea of tokens. He can't resolve Tassiger. There's only one Baleful Strix in the deck, so it is an uphill climb. Even if this sticks, it's not clear Hugo can contain the board at this stage.
All right, Blood Moon is down, so Jacob with just red mana, that'll strand that. The rest of his hand really has a Brainstorm in hand and some more lands.
Yep. And now Jacob just has to keep his fingers crossed and hope that Hugo can't cobble together a way to answer the board.
Well, swing from Jacob will deal 6 to start. Umezawa's Jite in Hugo's hand. That's one way he could gain some life, though Jite not going to do a great job of killing either of these creatures.
Nope.
Here's Young Pyromancer from Rodrigues. He's at 8, so he can take one more hit, but that's about it. Here's a swing for 6. Hugo's going to Pyroblast the Tarmogoyf. So this is actually very interesting. It's why Pyroblast is different than Red Elemental Blast.
Right, Pyroblast can target anything, any spell on the stack, or any permanent in play, and simply looks on resolution to see if the spell or permanent is blue. So that's the difference between Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast, and that's why Hugo is playing with Pyroblast, because he wants to be able to trigger his Young Pyromancer at a moment's notice.
So Pyroblast the Tarmogoyf. It's not destroyed because it is not blue, but it makes a 1/1, and that 1/1 chumps the Tarmogoyf. Looks like Forked Bolt in Rodrigues' hand. The 6 toughness on the Tarmogoyf is just really doing a number.
It's a lot. Hugo has a Jitte in hand, and if he can just sort of string together a sea of chump blockers, maybe he can get Jitte online, but even then, Jitte doesn't help very much the turn it connects.
Yeah, you see him there playing the Jitte, Forked Bolting, I believe Jacob, and just to make a 1/1.
Yeah. So you can see what the game plan is for Hugo, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to get the Jitte online and have it matter in time.
Yeah, the game plan is just to get Jitte counters.
Yeah.
But he'll need a steady stream of spells, and right now his spells aren't cantripping, so it's costing him a lot from his hand to do this.
Yeah, you can see what the game plan is, and if Hugo starts finding some cantrips, it becomes very good for him potentially.
Jacob will just swing the Tarmogoyf, does not want to offer a Nimble Mongoose trade.
Part of this is to leave the Nimble Mongoose back on defense, so if Hugo goes to equip the Jitte on the Young Pyromancer, Jacob might be able to block, and if Hugo doesn't have a spell or a follow-up creature, that's another way for Jacob to play around the Jitte.
Well, if Hugo has one more spell, he can make a 1/1 and put the Jitte on it, but I don't believe he does. I believe it's a land and a Vendilion Click. He does play 2 basic islands in his deck, but with the second one not already in play, he would just have to top deck it.
Yeah. The real big problem here for Hugo is right now, the Tarmogoyf is larger than 4, which means that the Jitte gaining 4 life a turn does not get Hugo progress. It helps stem the tide, and if Hugo can find something else to do, then it becomes very good.
All right, and show of resignment here from Hugo. He equips the Jitte to the Pyromancer, swings it in, trades with Nimble Mongoose. He now has his Jitte counters, but he has no creature to put them on as Jacob crashes in for 5 more.
And that's why Jacob didn't attack with the Nimble Mongoose last turn to set up that exchange this turn.
Draw. Can he get a blocker? Something to throw the Jitte onto. He's at 2. That's what he'll need.
And a lot of Hugo's cards are very hard to cast at this point, too. He can't cast any of his black cards. Any double blue card, like Dig Through Time or Vendilion Click, he can't cast. His red spells don't offer a lot of help here because Tarmogoyf is really big.
2 blue mana. It's going to be Snapcaster Mage. That actually could work here. So if he plays Snapcaster, and if this resolves and he gets the Jitte on it, the Snapcaster will trade with Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, this is good news.
The only thing you'd have to worry about from Jacob there would have been a Force of Will. Remember, Jacob can still cast that just off islands. But now we have Snapcaster with this Jitte counters on it. Hugo may have gotten where he needs to go.
Well, the issue is Hugo needs one more spell, I feel like, because Jacob can just say go, and Hugo's not in a position to attack yet. Because if Jacob can say no blocks, and then Hugo has to start using Jitte counters on defense to gain life, or shrink down the Tarmogoyf.
Also, if Jacob draws a burn spell, he can just burn Hugo, force Hugo, therefore, to use the Jitte to gain life, and then suddenly the Tarmogoyf wins combat.
Right, so one more reasonable play out of Hugo, even just a random creature, may be enough for him to stabilize.
Yeah, I mean, as we saw there, the Snapcaster Mage, that was just a 2/1 for 2, but that was a huge draw for him.
Right.
That said, though, the Blood Moon has done damage to Hugo. If you think about his reasonable draws here, he has 3 Young Pyromancers, a Snapcaster Mage. I think that one basic island gives Hugo a lot of length to work with.
Yeah, but, I mean, yes, the Blood Moon is definitely disrupting Hugo here, but it's doing way more damage to Jacob, who just can't cast anything.
And here's Pyroblast on Young Pyromancer, the draw from Jacob. A real big one.
Yeah, this is, I mean, Hugo's got to counter this or produce a chump blocker or something, because this is lethal.
It's going to die. He can gain 4 and go to 1. Sorry, he'll go to 4, he'll go to 6. Now he'll go down to 1. But the lines that help him out here now are few and far between. Draw from Hugo. Did he get anything that will help him? And he does not. Jacob Wilson, 2-0, gets it. And for him, deck he referred to actually yesterday as Old Faithful for him.
Yeah.
Still churning along at 5-0.
Yeah, a harrowing game there for Jacob. It looked like he was in a great position there. Even when the Blood Moon came down,